Chapter 1: The Alley Behind the World. Rain-soaked Seoul back alley at 2 a.m. Flickering neon sign reflecting in black puddles. A young black woman in a white diner apron kneeling over a suited Korean man slumped against a graffiti-covered brick wall. Blood spreading on dark concrete. Cinematic low angle, rain streaks, cold blue and red neon palette, photorealistic. The rain came down on Itaewon the way it always did after midnight, not as weather, but as judgment. Zara Cole felt it soaking through her apron before she even made it to the back door of the Golden Fork Diner, her sneakers already ruined from 12 hours of grease-strapped floors and impatient customers. She was 22, exhausted in every bone, and she had 17 flyers left in her bag. 17 photocopied faces of her brother Deon, 18 years old, missing for 6 weeks, that she still had not managed to distribute after her double shift. She heard him before she saw him. A low, controlled sound, not a scream. Something worse, the sound of a man who had trained himself not to make noise and was losing that battle. She almost didn't stop. The alley behind the restaurant was not a place you paused at 2 a.m. Every instinct from every lecture her mother ever gave her said, "Keep walking." But the sound came again, deliberate and diminishing, and Zara Cole had never been able to walk past diminishing things. He was propped against the brick wall beneath a broken halogen light, one hand pressed flat against his left side, his black suit so dark that the blood barely registered until she was close enough to smell the iron of it. He was Korean, late 30s, with the kind of face that had been handsome before whatever had happened to him tonight carved new angles into it. His jaw was set. His eyes, when they found her, were not frightened. They were calculating, even now, even bleeding in a Gangnam alley with his Italian shoes filling with rainwater. "Walk away," he said. His English was precise, practiced, the voice of a man who commanded rooms. "You're bleeding through your hand," Zara said. "I am aware of that." She crouched anyway. She unzipped her bag, pushed past the stack of Deon's flyers, and pulled out the compact first aid kit she carried everywhere. A habit from growing up with an asthmatic little brother who made every outing into a potential emergency. Her hands moved with the calm muscle memory of 1,000 small crises. He watched her tear open a gauze pack with the slightly stunned expression of a man who had never once been helped by a stranger and did not know the protocol. "What is your name?" he asked. "Zara." She pressed the gauze to his side without ceremony. "What's yours?" He said nothing. She hadn't really expected him to. She could see the shape of him more clearly now, the precision of the cut of his suit, the single gold signet ring on his right hand, the way even half-conscious he held his body like a loaded weapon. Whoever he was not an ordinary man. She didn't care. He was bleeding and she had gauze, and those two facts were the only equation that mattered to Zara Cole in that moment. She could not know, not yet, that the man she was wrapping her apron strings around was Ji-hoon Baek, that the name she had been whispering into every dark corner of Itaewon for 6 weeks, the name connected to her brother's disappearance, was the same name this man would refuse to give her. She could not know that she had been looking for him for weeks and had found him by accident, bleeding in the rain. The universe had a brutal sense of theater. "Can you stand?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, not gratitude, not quite. Something more like the reluctant acknowledgement of a debt he had not planned to incur. "Yes," he said, and he let her help him up. Chapter 2: The Vigil. Small Seoul apartment interior. Warm yellow lamp light against cold rain-streaked window. A wounded Korean man in a white undershirt sitting rigidly on a simple wooden chair. A young black woman with natural hair sitting on the floor across from him. Both awake in the middle of the night. Exhausted and wary, intimate tension. Warm amber versus cold blue contrast. Film still aesthetic. Her apartment was a 400-square-foot argument against ambition. A single room in a building that smelled of other people's cooking and old concrete. A window that looked directly into the side wall of the building next door. She had made it into something anyway. Sketches of Deon pinned above the small desk. A string of warm lights along the ceiling that made the place feel less like a waiting room. A stove that worked on 3 of its 4 burners. Ji-hoon Baek sat on her only chair and said absolutely nothing while she cleaned the wound properly. The bullet had grazed his left side, deep enough to need stitching, not deep enough to kill him. He would not tell her how it had happened. He sat with the vertical stillness of a man who had learned that stillness was its own form of power, and he watched her work with those dark, assessing eyes. Zara worked in silence because she had run out of questions he would answer. She had asked his name twice. She had asked if he needed a hospital. She had asked if there was someone she should call. To each inquiry he had returned nothing but a cool, clipped no. So she stitched him with the emergency suture kit she kept for reasons she'd never had to explain to anyone, and she tried not to notice that her hands were steadier than his breathing. "You're not afraid of me," he said at last. It was not a question. It sounded almost like an accusation. "I'm afraid of plenty of things," Zara said. "You're just not one of them right now." She tied off the last suture. "Right now you're just a man with a hole in his side sitting in my kitchen chair." He considered this. Outside, the rain had downgraded to a persistent drizzle. Somewhere on the street below, a delivery moped rattled past. She made ramyun because it was 3 a.m., and it was the only hot thing she could make in under 10 minutes. She set a bowl in front of him without asking. He looked at it for a moment with an expression she couldn't read, something between suspicion and a kind of old, hollow hunger that had nothing to do with food. Then he ate, slowly, with the deliberate composure of a man who refused to let even appetite become vulnerability. Zara sat on the floor with her own bowl, her back against the wall, and looked up at the string of lights above her. She thought about Deon. She thought about the last night she had seen him, the way he had hugged her too tightly before she left for her shift, the way she had been too tired to notice the fear behind it. She thought about the flyers. 17 left. She thought about the name she had been given by a frightened street vendor 2 weeks ago, Black Crane, Ji-hoon Baek. She looked at the man in her chair. She had a stack of his missing persons flyers about a man who might know where her brother was. And the man who might know was sitting 4 feet away, eating her ramyun, bleeding gently through her best gauze. She didn't know that yet. The universe was still winding its spring. He fell asleep in the chair before dawn, because his body simply ended the argument his pride had been winning. She watched him sleep for a moment, the hard lines of his face gone soft, the mask dissolved, a man who looked in sleep like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time. She covered him with her spare blanket, turned off the light, and lay down on her own narrow bed. In the morning, she would put up the last 17 flyers. In the morning, everything would look different. She did not know how different. Chapter 3: The Grenade. Close-up of a missing person flyer on a Seoul apartment desk. A young black man's photo visible. The Korean words for missing partially visible. A man's hand with a gold signet ring hovering over the flyer. The hand slightly trembling. Dramatic single-desk lamp, deep shadow, crimson and gold accent tones, hyperreal detail. She found him standing at her desk when she woke. He had not left, which surprised her. He had not gone through her things except for one. He stood with his back to her, a single sheet of paper in his hands, and the quality of his stillness was different now. The weapon stillness was gone. In its place was something seismic, a stillness that preceded collapse. Zara was on her feet before she was fully awake. "That's private." He turned. His face was a controlled blankness, but his eyes gave him away. They were not the calculating eyes from the alley. They were the eyes of a man standing at the edge of something. He was holding one of her flyers. Zara Cole, 18 years old, missing since March 4th, last seen near Mapogu. If you have any information, please contact Ji-hoon Baek of the Black Crane. She had written the name in Korean beneath her own number, because the street vendor had told her that was the organization connected to Deon's disappearance, and she had been leaving that name on every flyer like bait for a trap she didn't know how to spring. Ji-hoon read the name she had written, his own name. The silence lasted a full 10 seconds. "This boy," he said, his voice very low, "he is your brother." Zara's heartbeat became a physical thing. "What do you know about him?" Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. He set the flyer down on the desk with a care that felt like penance. He turned fully to face her, and something extraordinary happened. Ji-hoon Baek, the man who had been shot and had not flinched, who had sat in her chair and given nothing away, looked at her with an expression of pure, unguarded devastation. "Your brother came to my organization 6 weeks ago," he said. "He was looking for work. One of my lieutenants, a man who no longer works for me, accepted him without my knowledge. And then he stopped. He looked at the window. There was a situation, a dispute between my organization and a rival faction. Deon was present. He was not supposed to be there." His jaw tightened. "He was not hurt, but he was frightened and he ran, and we have not been able to find him since." Zara heard every word. She processed every word. And then she did the hardest thing she had ever done. She did not scream. She did not throw him out. She did not fall apart. She sat down on the edge of her bed and she asked, in a voice that shook only slightly, "Is he alive?" "To my knowledge, yes." He met her eyes. "I have been looking for him. That is partly why I was in this neighborhood last night. I was meeting an informant who claimed to know his location. That meeting went poorly, as you observed." Zara looked at the man she had stitched up in the dark, the man she had fed ramyun, the man she had covered with her spare blanket. She had been hunting Ji-hoon Baek for 6 weeks. She had found him bleeding in an alley and carried him home. "You were looking for my brother," she said. "Yes. And I have been looking for you." He said nothing. He didn't have to. The mathematics of it were already destroying and rebuilding the space between them. Chapter 4: The Reckoning. Seoul rooftop at night. A young black woman and a Korean man in a dark coat standing side by side looking out over city lights, both tense but aligned. A tablet glowing between them showing a map with location pins. Urgent alliance energy. Neon city glow below. Cold wind implied by their postures. Cinematic wide shot. Gold and midnight blue palette. She gave him the terms over the last of the coffee. "You're going to tell me everything you know about where Deon might be. Every contact, every location, every person your informant mentioned before the meeting went wrong. And then you're going to help me get to him." She held his gaze. "In exchange, I'm going to pretend I didn't just spend 6 weeks plastering your name all over Itaewon as a person of interest in my brother's disappearance." Ji-hoon Baek looked at her for a long moment. "That is not how negotiations in my world typically proceed." "I'm not in your world," Zara said. "I'm in mine, and in mine you owe me." He was quiet. She watched him decide. She could see it happening, the internal architecture of a man who controlled everything, slowly making room for the one variable he had not planned for. "Yes," he said, "I do." They worked through the rest of the morning at her small desk, shoulder to shoulder over his phone and her handwritten notes. He was methodical, precise. She understood why he commanded what he did. He had a mind like a blueprint, every piece of information filed and cross-referenced. He showed her the informant's last message before the ambush. A neighborhood, a building code, a floor number. Zara saw it. She almost missed it, but the number nagged at her the way numbers did when something was off, not the floor, but the pattern. She had Deon's text messages printed out and paperclipped in the back of her notebook, because she was the kind of person who printed things. She pulled them out and spread them on the desk. "Look at this," she said, pointing. 3 weeks ago Deon had texted her, staying with a friend near the market, building with the blue door, level 4, the message that had meant nothing to her then. "Same building," she said. "Your informant and my brother, same building." Ji-hoon stared at the printout. He stared at it for long enough that she understood what she was watching, a man who had been thorough and systematic, humbled by a detail he had not had. A detail that had been in a phone archive, in English, in a young woman's notebook, outside the reach of every resource he possessed. "Your brother was sheltering there," he said. He was hiding from my organization and from the rival faction both. His voice dropped a register. He was protecting himself the only way he knew how, by disappearing in plain sight. He's smart, Zara said. Her voice broke on the last word just slightly. She pressed her lips together. Ji-hoon Baek did something unexpected then. He did not pretend she hadn't broken. He simply waited with a kind of grave, deliberate patience while she put herself back together. He did not look away. He witnessed it without flinching, without using it, without filling the silence with anything that would have made it smaller. When she looked up, she found him watching her with an expression she had seen once before on the face of her father at her mother's funeral. The look of someone who understood loss in a language older than words. "Then we go tonight," Zara said. "We go tonight," Ji-hoon agreed. Chapter 5: The Dawn. Seoul apartment hallway at golden hour. A young black woman and her teenage brother embracing tightly in the doorway. The brother's face buried in her shoulder. Warm amber sunrise flooding through a window at the end of the hall. A Korean man in a dark coat standing slightly apart watching them with a quietly undone expression. Photorealistic 8K. Warm gold and soft orange color palette. Cinematic depth of field. Deon was on the 4th floor, behind a blue door that matched his text message with the kind of precision only fear and instinct can produce. He had been there for 11 days, surviving on convenient store deliveries and the fierce, animal intelligence of a boy who had always been smarter than his circumstances. He opened the door to Zara's knock and stood there looking at her, 18 years old, thinner than she remembered, wearing a hoodie she had given him the previous Christmas, and neither of them spoke for a full 3 seconds. Then she had her arms around him and her face in his shoulder, and the sound she made was not quite crying and not quite a word, but both of them understood it completely. Ji-hoon stood in the hallway and did not come in. He had cleared the path. He had used every contact he possessed to ensure that both his own organization and the rival faction would not be a threat tonight, in this building, on this floor. He had walked 3 flights of stairs with a freshly stitched wound in his side without a single complaint. He had done all of this with the focused efficiency of a man repaying a debt. But he stood in the hallway because this was not his moment, and he understood the difference. When Zara finally looked up and met his eyes over Deon's shoulder, there was nothing performed in his expression. No calculation. No composure. He looked like a man who had just watched something end well that he had been afraid would not, and the relief of it had reached somewhere he didn't usually permit things to reach. Deon saw him, he stiffened. Zara felt it. "He's why you're safe right now," she said quietly. Deon studied Ji-hoon with the wary, intelligent eyes of a boy who had learned hard lessons fast. Ji-hoon met his gaze without deflection. No apology, but no arrogance either, only the direct, honest acknowledgement of a man taking full measure of the harm his world had caused. "I owe your sister," Ji-hoon said, "and I owe you a conversation, tonight when you're ready, not before." Something shifted in Deon's posture. Not trust, that would take longer, and all 3 of them knew it, but the beginning of a consideration, the possibility of a conversation that might lead, in time, to something like understanding. They walked out into the Seoul morning together, the sun coming up gold and blunt over the Han River. Zara had Deon's hand in hers. She would not let go of it for a long time, and she did not care how old he thought he was. Ji-hoon walked beside them, not ahead, not behind, in a new configuration that none of them had a word for yet. At the corner, where the street widened and the smell of the pajangmatcha carts reached them with their steam and their salt, Deon pulled away gently to look at a shop window. Just for a moment. Just a boy being a boy. Zara and Ji-hoon stood side by side on the pavement in the rising light. "I found you in an alley," she said, not to accuse, just to state the fact of it. "You did," he looked at the morning. "I have been many things in this city. No one has ever simply found me before." She understood the weight of that. She did not make it smaller. "What happens now?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment in the specific way she had already learned to read, not evasion, but precision. He was choosing exact words for an inexact feeling. "Now," he said, "I think you get to decide that. For the first time in a long time, I believe the answer to what happens next belongs to someone other than me." She looked at him, at the man she had been hunting and the man she had carried home, both of them somehow the same person, at the weariness in him, at the thing beneath the weariness that was cautious and alive. Deon came back from the shop window. He stood between them in the gold morning light of Seoul, eating a piece of hotteok from a paper bag, and for one moment all three of them simply breathed the same air, at the edge of a city that was already busy forgetting last night's violence. The alley had been the end of one story. This corner in this light was the beginning of something that did not have a name yet, which was, Zara Cole was beginning to understand exactly how the best stories start.